Meeting at least until Commissioner Thomas gets here. I'd like to welcome you. And do we have a quorum? We have 4 people at the moment, so we are good. Just looking over the format that I was handed looks different to me, although I don't think it is. So we're going to start tonight's meeting with an invocation or a thought by Commissioner Green, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led to us by Commissioner Bailey. Commissioner Green.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer a thought as we close out this year. I just want to kind of reflect and extend gratitude for essentially our city council, our mayor, and all the employees of North Ogden as we think about this beautiful city and how it's functioning. It really takes a small army, literally, to accomplish that. We've been amazed as citizens at just how well the city's functioning, and public works departments are attending to, neighborhoods, things like leaf pickups, but there's a million things they do. Those are just the things we see in the front, the green waste operations. It's always been so nice to go there and drop things off. But essentially from the planning, department to the lovely ladies that sit there when you go in to, have city business be conducted, to our public works and police department. I mean, it goes on and on. We've got John here and Scott and Ryan who are doing phenomenal work. And so I just wanted to acknowledge their efforts and those of the city council as well, and just be grateful that these people put their time and energy into making our city as wonderful as it is. And that is my thought for today.
Amen to that.
I will all stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chair Mason.
Yes, sir.
I just received a notification from Johnson Webb that he has been, he's unable to attend the meeting tonight and has apologized, but he's been excused.
Thank you. Let the meetings please, or the minutes please show that Commissioner Webb will not be in attendance. Aside from that, I believe, let's see, we have 7 of us, right? Who else are we missing?
Eric Thomas.
Eric.
And Cody.
And Cody's excused as well. That's right. Okay. Our consent agenda tonight consists of one item, and that is an action to approve the previous minutes.
And I move that we approve the October 2nd, 2024 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Great. All in favor with a voice vote? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Do we have any ex parte communications to disclose, conflict of interest on anything with tonight's agenda? Okay, let the record show there were none. Let's go ahead and move into our administrative section of the agenda. We'd first invite the public. Anyone here that's wanting to address the Planning Commission to do so? Do we have anybody online?
We do have one person watching.
Okay, I would remind the public and those wishing to participate that we would be interested in hearing comments specific to a specific agenda item at that time. So we'd ask you to hold your comments then, but if there's any general remarks or anything, we're open to entertain that now. Nobody online?
No raised hands.
Okay, we tried. Okay, let's move right into the one agenda item on our administrative section, which is SUB 2421, consideration and action regarding an administrative application, which is the preliminary plat approval of the views at Rockwood Subdivision Phase 2, approximately 500 East, 3825 North. And Ryan Nunn is going to present that for us.
Thank you, commissioners. This subdivision, the views of Rockwood Phase 2, is the second phase for the area up north of about 475 East and where Mountain Road will eventually go. This is for a 10-lot subdivision. It'll be a cul-de-sac. It's in our HP1 zone, which requires 10,000 square foot lots with 90 feet of frontage. We've held our technical review committee meeting, and our city engineer has written a memo for comments we would like to see added. Right now with the preliminary plat, we've confirmed that the lots each are 10,000 square feet. We've asked for some updates for that 90-foot frontage to show that they are 90 feet at 30 feet back.
Question on that, is that at the arced section, so the cul-de-sac?
Correct. That was we wanted to have that confirmed and shown on the plat. Because in my measurements, a couple were a little short. So in that curve table, we've asked it to be updated to show that 90 feet, have a column added there. Our engineer has asked for some additional updates to be made, like where the snow storage is, and to make sure the cul-de-sac bulb will meet the public works standards. So those are all conditions of approval. Our city engineer has also specified to the developer for Mountain Road that we'll ask for an escrow to be given for the cost of developing the road for future. I know he's made comments of that it's not needed right now, so it won't be developed, but we'll have the money needed to get it built and all the infrastructure in. So our staff does recommend approval of this preliminary plat with the conditions of approval listed from our TRC memo, our engineering, and those given in our staff report. And I'll be happy to help answer any questions you may have further, so.
Before we deliberate, does the planning commission have any questions? Okay, I'd invite the applicant, if they're here, to provide any commentary, questions, address us as you would like.
Thank you for your time tonight, Commission. My name is Luke Martineau. I don't know if you need my address or anything, but Centerville, Utah. This is the second phase of the reviews at Rockwood. We're very familiar with North Ogden City. We've loved working with you guys. Your staff has been amazing to work with. As far as the project goes, we've been reviewing the comments from the TRC, and I actually got plans today, updated plans to submit to the city. So we're aware of the concerns that have been raised, and we're working to address those as best we can. And I'm sure there might be other comments that come forth, but we're a willing partner with the city. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to field any of those.
When you say address them as best you can, do you foresee any issues with meeting the conditions of approval, particularly the 90-foot setback or the trail?
No, none of that. No. When I say address them as best I can, in case there's any nuances, maybe the city has a different idea of what something means and we didn't get that quite right, but we're okay with all of those conditions.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just
Hang on real
wanted,
quick.
not a question for the applicant. I just wanted to, there's some unique things between a preliminary plat and a final plat. And Planning Commission used to see final plats, and those have been administrative in our code now for the last 2 years. So the preliminary plat for us by state code, it's street configuration, lot configuration, total density on a site. We meet the basic planning elements essentially. And then from there, the final plat process typically goes through a series of reviews between the developer and the engineer and the planning department, going back and forth to kind of fine tune everything down to a final set of plans, improvement drawings, the full construction set of drawings. So there are elements of this that we've got items to fine tune, and a for example on that might be there is a 1956 pole line easement that has been recorded across this that shows, and we've recently dealt with a power pole easement that affected the distance that a home could be built, a vertical distance that a home could be built, and we had a note on the plat. So there's items like that that might arise that you don't see a full easement or a note on the plat today, but we want to go out and assess how high is that pole? Is that going to be undergrounded? You know, what happens with that utility between now and final plat to really identify what happens with the final plat. So for Planning Commission, what you're looking at is are we meeting the conditions of the zone? Does the cul-de-sac length meet its requirements? Are there any external items that are necessary? This would be a place to have the conversation about the R lots, which we had discussed before. Are there any restricted lots that should be assessed here and for what reasons? Elements like that are really important at the preliminary plat to get during the entitlement stage. And then it's kind of go forth and they can begin building the subdivision. They can begin improving the land, leading up to getting an actual final plat recorded and sellable lots.
I didn't see anything in this report or anything that jumped out at me that there should be restricted lots because of power lines or.
The only is we have lots 10 and 9 and 10, and I could
Mhm.
let Ryan explain this too, but there are some old access easements that provided access to the Hollis property and properties east of the Hollis property that are recorded easements, and those recorded easements have now been drawn onto a subdivision plat. So taking a previously like a meets and bounds description or a recorded written description and putting it on the plat kind of shores up those easements in a lot of ways because they've now been surveyed, they've been drawn on a plat, they're recorded. And some of those easements, when you go back in and look at them, say once public access is provided, so you have another public road is provided, the perpetual access easement goes away. So that's a title company item essentially, but we're doing our part to show any of those recorded easements. If anything on this one were to be restricted in staff's opinion, that would be lots 2, lots 9, and lots 10, specifically because you have the power easement running across them east to west for lot 2 and 9, and lot 10 a north-south easement on the east side of that lot on the rear line of that lot, and the R lot with the note would be for whoever buys it to essentially make sure you do your due diligence and read all of this information. But there's nothing else up there on this particular piece of property that's unique from a geologic standpoint or other reason that we'd have any other restricted lots that we can see.
Regarding that access easement, am I reading this, am I getting this correct in my brain that easement would currently prevent the homeowner from fencing all the way up to their property line in the backyard on lot 10 at least?
Yep.
And potentially lot 9,
Correct.
some of it, right? Okay. Okay, before we deliberate, we would invite the public or anyone that has any comments to, if addressed, we'll call you. We have a, let's let the public have a shot at this and you'll get final rebuttal, and that's following our procedures better. Okay. So,
We do have a hand raised online.
great. Let's go ahead and hear.
So
Can you hear me?
Chris- Yes.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously this is nearby, so I've seen it, and I just, there's a lot of the stub
Sir,
to the road.
I think we know who you are, but can you go ahead and state your name?
Oh, sorry.
For the minutes?
Yeah, Chris Pulver, North Ogden. How about that?
Okay.
And there's going to be a lot of dirt moving because if you've driven into the stub, there's another 10 feet of dirt that you're facing. But obviously that's going to be interesting. But I guess the one thing, and you're looking at the plat and talking with the Hollises, the easements are just so unique. And I think to make sure that, all of those, on yada yada page of this, from 1957 or 60, whatever it is, that I don't know if it would be good to just stake all those out so that both parties can go figure out what needs to go where. Because, once you put it on the final plat, obviously it's preliminary, so that's why I'm talking about it, but is to just to make sure that everybody's, golden. Because right now the houses are literally waiting to make sure they put their mailbox on the right spot, so that's kind of the whole thing. And I think talking with Scott that's going to be the plan, but I just want to get that on the record and make sure, because there's a lot of little, if you look at that south east corner, I mean, it's just loaded. So that's the most complicated thing I've ever seen in that corner. Anyway, So just, to me, that would be something between the city developer and the houses to go figure out that corner and that road to the in between that goes up, just to go figure that out. And then the last thing was, you said escrow for the road to the north, for Mountain Road. I guess that's all well and good, but if it doesn't get built for 5 years, that escrow is not going to cover what the city is going to have to take to build it. So I guess, what if it's just an escrow and the city's going to suck it up if we don't build it right away? What's the point of not building it? Anyway, just a thought, but that's it. I mean, it's going to be a good thing. The houses so far in the other phase have been spectacular. I think that's it's been a good development so far with Henry Walker and stuff like that's been building those. So anyways, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we let you unmute, or while
Yeah.
we've got you unmuted, is there any specific conditions of approval you could recommend to the planning commission? I mean, those were some decent thoughts, but some of them are hard to, in my opinion, put on paper.
I would, the condition would be to have all of the little doodads on the bottom right-hand corner of that, and he said the power pole too, to just map those out. So because I'm a visual guy myself, and if you don't have a stake in the ground, I have no idea where 8 seconds away from, northwest, yada, yada, 5.91 feet from this location. I have no idea what any of that means. To me, that's something a surveyor would be able to figure out, and hopefully, and then go stake it out to see if half their driveway is, because it's literally a driveway, is, on the other property, which I don't think it would be, but who knows? So, to me, the condition of approval would be to make sure that all those easements match what's surveyed there. And if it's already been done, then so be it. But it doesn't sound like it has been, at least from what I've told.
Thank you for your comments.
Yep.
Do we have any other public who's wanting to address us? Okay, I'd give the applicant time for final rebuttal to.
Yeah, I appreciate the gentleman online. Those are great items, and we are aware of those. As far as the pole line easement, we're planning to underground everything just like we did in the last phase. So while it might show up on a title report right now, since we haven't finalized everything with Rocky Mountain Power, that should be something that's cleaned up by the end of the plating process when we're ready to record. And so that's something we're well aware of. We're also aware of the access easements. We've been actually talking with Ken Hollis, who's the neighbor to the east of us. He has an access road that is on the west side of his property that runs up north to access 3 different other parcels that Mountain Road will then, excuse me, that will join to. We're working with Ken right now in an agreement of either an easement or a purchase to get land so that he has the access as well as all of those people so that they won't be affected by this new development. So we want to section off that east side of our property so that we don't need to, I guess, bother these new homeowners with worrying about access easements for people that are still there. And so we're aware of these items and we're happy to address those as we continue forward and as we keep working with these landowners to come to agreements that make sense for us and make sense for them. So appreciate you letting me come back up and take the time. Thank you.
Scott, even with all of these easements, the lot still meets the minimum requirements for the zone.
Yeah, and the
And
minimum,
it's for a buildable lot. Yeah.
yep, and easements can impact a property's size, but doesn't necessarily change it might change its buildable area, but the overall size can include easements of any and all sort in order to meet the minimums of the zone. Typically, they try to keep the lot large enough that it's going to be able to be buildable, like retain a buildable area. Undergrounding the power would require that there's likely going to be like an east-west public utility easement that power line would run in between those lots, but that's really common. So that would make that one whole. And then if Mountain Road is able to be the public right of way that provides access to those northern 3 lots, then it's possible that those perpetual access easements go away and that gets written out of the plat between preliminary and final. So as of right now, it's kind of like the preliminary plat shows everything possible. And then regarding Mountain Road, phase 1 of Views at Rockwood had just a sliver, just a triangle of Mountain Road, not enough to build even like a partial cross section of it. And this piece has the majority of Mountain Road. I think it will build the full 80-foot right of way or pretty close to. But the city's been working with WACOG in doing acquisition funds. So the city's actually interested in, and John can speak more to this if I get it wrong, but in potentially building a section of Mountain Road all at once. So you don't have these miniature pieces of asphalt that begin to degrade at one time. So that it makes more sense at this point for an entirely not accessible piece of Mountain Road from phase 2 to not be constructed today, but rather be escrowed. And then we'd utilize those funds in the future, hopefully on a short time horizon to construct a larger portion of Mountain Road that would provide connectivity.
And Mr. Pulver had some concerns about the escrow had some time limitation to it. Is that a concern?
I interpreted Mr. Pulver's comments to say that money just sitting in escrow may not appreciate at the same rate that construction costs increase. And so therefore we'd be, we may not have enough money saved up to build it. My thought on
I
that,
just I wasn't familiar with.
yeah, my counterpoint to that would be, economies of scale. It's likely more expensive to build a small section of road per linear foot than it would be, right, a larger section. So I don't know. I'm not in construction and.
Well, and it's a little unique in that we probably, this money, we wouldn't call it escrow, because escrow is kind of money held and then used, has an end date on it. We probably put together an agreement that says, look, hey, we will use this money for Mountain Road, understanding that the city is taking the obligation for this section. Because if we decided to start at the east or the west end or the south end of Mountain Road, we might take the money and spend it there now. So we'd get more linear feet for the bang. And then when we get to this section might be more expensive than it is today, but another section got paid for, so it's not like the money would go to waste. But with that, we would have a clear obligation. The city will put the improvements in, because we anticipate that with this road and Mountain Road in general, where you have some good options with property owners to get some infrastructure in and maybe make some of those critical connections in the near future.
Thanks.
I believe though the staff comments did say the word escrow in there. Did you want to change that? If we make on a motion on this? From the word escrow to, does that matter?
Yeah, I think if you changed it to say it was an agreement for the Mountain Road
Development.
cost, right of way costs.
So conditions of approval do not say, I'm looking at them now, meet the requirement, the conditions of approval is per the staff report says, meet the requirements of the technical review committee, meet the requirements of the staff report, meet the requirements of the engineering report, all lots have 90 feet frontage. So it does not, I thought I had read earlier the word escrow in there.
The word escrow is in there. It's the last paragraph under staff review agency comments.
Okay. Oh, I see. The developer will be required to escrow for the cost of, okay. All right, but it's not a condition of approval. Normally we say, yeah, as per conditions of approval. One question, were there other questions from the Plan Commission or comments?
I think just maybe, I'm not quite sure. So it sounds like, our comment from the public in this case was about this idea that maybe the easements were really complicated and there needed to be a different map or view of those easements. Can you just maybe, Scott, speak to that? Like, is there something else that we should ask for at this point? Or, you know what I mean? It sounds like the word visual was used a few times.
And what
I think we could just request a separate drawing purely showing the easements for clarity.
Yeah, is that
Just a-
something that could be helpful? I mean,
And we could add that as part of the final plat package. I don't know that it changes anything as far as the entitlements that Planning Commission is making today, because
right.
those 2 lots, lot 9 and 10, will exist with or without that access easement on the east side. I don't think that it really changes their size. And we will see, if you have a lot size minimum of 10,000 square feet, lot lines will adjust between preliminary and final plat, as long as they're not adding lots or subtracting lots that, you know, they've essentially been entitled to X number of doors on this general configuration. And then they can slide property lines a little bit around between preliminary and final. So the other point of the comment that I heard, or I think I heard, was asking a surveyor to go out and actually physically survey and flag this, which does happen every time a survey goes out and a subdivision happens. And we get to catch a lot of weird old property line issues when you go from like a 60-year-old rod and chain property description to today's survey with actual survey equipment that's GPS located. We'll find little slivers of bits of property between property owners that end up kind of being absorbed one way or the other and corrected. So going out and actually surveying the easement as it is today on the ground, I think is a good idea and may or may not have already happened. I'm not sure if it has and has been flagged. So we would, we'll require that. And then Eric Casperson, our city engineer, will typically go up and walk those as well, just to take a look at anything that's sort of an abnormality. But for tonight, I don't know that the planning commission could ask for it, clearly delineate or have a page on the plans that clearly delineates the easements for us for our consideration. I don't know that it changes staff's recommendation of approval on the preliminary plat or is a reason to kick this to January 15th for approval from the planning commission tonight.
Thank you.
Staff, I did have one question, and I've asked this in here a number of times, and you guys have always resolved this concern, but I noticed that we technically create a double fronted lot situation. And I like this design. I think it's optimal to not have your driveway sticking on to Mountain Road, but technically in that cul-de-sac, you've got the house facing the cul-de-sac, and in the backyard abuts Mountain Road. How do we, and we also have in our regs to avoid double fronted lots. How do we, what's the justification here?
It'll be a lot it'll be a note on the plat for lots 5 and 6 that they can't have a secondary access coming off the other side. So the Ivory Home subdivision on Fruitland Drive is a good example of a cul-de-sac that terminated at Fruitland, had the same note on the plat that these lots can't have a secondary access off of Mountain Road. So it would just be it'll be a note on the plat essentially. And I can't confirm, but I believe that was talked about in the TRC and or might be in the engineer's letter, but that would be something it's in our code for no double frontage lots, so they can't have access off of it. And it's really just a
So is the
configuration
definition
issue.
of double fronted lot then that there's access to both roads? Because I mean, if you're just looking at, I hope, first of all, I really agree with this design. I think it's way better to have those backyards abut that than front yards. I really do. But my job here is to review code, and if our code states that we can't have double fronted lots, right?
That is,
So,
The note on the plat, I think, addresses it being a double fronted lot.
yeah, we wouldn't consider that frontage. It would be the backyard. So I guess it depends on, there's probably the letter of the law definition of the way you read frontage, meaning any stretch of land on a public road. But if it has no access, then it's really just a parcel line adjacent to or touching a right of way. So without access, it eliminates the, is it or is it not frontage kind of question? Because we don't want, same thing for the protection of the lot owners in the cul-de-sac. We don't want lot 6 and lot 5 to build their home fronting Mountain Road. So they'd get kind of like backyard view lots, because then the cul-de-sac would sort of get weird and be flipped. But it's something you deal with infill development. And to answer your question, we have our city attorney here who may or may not be able to help, but my interpretation of it would be you restrict access and that eliminates the frontage.
I don't want to
portion.
necessarily beat this up. I just,
Well, so
That's a good point.
our code, and this is 1126-3C, that says double frontage and reverse frontage lots are only permitted on arterial and collector streets, which Mountain Road is.
okay.
So it's to keep people from accessing these roads at a little higher traffic, higher
But to
speed.
your point, it's not a double fronted lot, but it's a reverse fronted lot, right? Or is that?
I think we would call it a double frontage, but it's allowed when the secondary road is that busier road
Gotcha.
that we don't want people
And that makes a lot
Yeah.
more sense, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great.
So we are in compliance.
So do you guys think we should include in the approval an agreement for Mountain Road right-of-way costs? And or that the final plat clearly delineates these easements? At this point, do you think it's important to include that?
I do. I think both of those things seem reasonable and the one is already, it sounds like agreed upon. It's just a language terminology change. The other one seems like it'd be fairly simple, but just might help at least also, you know, when city council gets this, it sounds like that might help them in their process as well.
Yeah, well, I don't think this goes to the city
Oh,
council.
good point,
Yeah.
good point. But it might help us be conscious of the fact though that with staff, when it gets to final approval,
Right,
that that's
right.
something that was wanted
Yeah.
to.
And obviously a city council member had
Yeah.
a concern about it.
And there are quite a few of those like on that east side, so it might not be a
It
bad
is,
idea.
it is
just-
complicated on that corner.
Mhm.
I'm actually not in favor of having an additional plat drawn up or whatever, because I feel like that naturally resolves itself when it comes to final. And I just don't want to create a bunch of extra work. But if that is felt that's needed, I wouldn't oppose it, really. I do think some verbiage in our motion tonight about the money being set aside for Mountain Road is appropriate. The other one I don't have much of an appetite for personally, but I also don't feel strongly. What's that?
I'm in favor of that.
2 and 2. Oh, boy. Where's Eric when we need him? Yeah, I actually don't feel strongly about that either way. I wouldn't hold up, I don't think a motion either way. So
Yeah, and I guess.
my
and-
2 cents.
And I don't know if we're really the right body to require it exactly. I could just see it being really helpful for these existing property owners as they navigate things and the new ones. So that would be my only thought, but I don't know.
Yeah, Scott, it sounded to me like when you described it to me at first, that when the final plat comes out, that there will be more clarity and that would be reflected in the final
that the
plat.
case?
Is that?
I mean, this is in a lot of ways, having these drawn on a plat, preliminary and then final, solidifies these easements in a way that the current description doesn't. I mean, right now you have to be a title company, a title search person. You have to go down to the county. You have to actually pull this book page and number in order to read these easements, as opposed to the plat. Once it's a final drawing, it's forever on the plat essentially. And so, I'm kind of cautious the other way, that by drawing it on the plat, it may solidify it in its own unique way. And we want to make sure that the reading of the plat says, or sorry, the reading of the easement say, when a secondary access is available, this goes away. And then we don't have to worry about there being a plat amendment. It just sort of becomes like a
That's
ghost
true.
of an
That's true.
easement that exists on the plat. But by drawing them and then recording them, it's like belt and suspenders. I mean, you have to do a plat amendment in order to eliminate it in the future. It's kind of doubles down, as opposed to right now, you have to either know it exists or through a title report in the sale of property, those things present themselves in the search, like title search of property.
Mhm.
So I'm not overly concerned with it, because I think the way the easements read is that they will ultimately go away. So by the time lots 9 and 10 are out there putting fences, there may be a secondary access that eliminates that easement altogether. What I don't want to do is, if the Hollis's actual house driveway right now straddles one of those lines between 9 and 10, we do want to preserve that and or make it so that we're not affecting an existing property owner who's utilized and has an access. And that's where going out and surveying the line and understanding exactly where the property ownerships are is really important. But I don't know that that's the responsibility of this party in the preliminary plat process.
No, I think the explanation was great. And I think you're right that it sounds like we do have increased clarity, which is great, but we don't want a situation where we have to amend things later. I mean, that makes complete
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, I agree.
So, yeah.
Like
I'll
the-
make do you
Oh, I
want
just wanted to have the record show that the real chairman, Chairman Thomas, arrived at 6:35. So I will not be calling on him for a vote, as he didn't hear the entirety. No. We're going to defer here in a second. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's
That was a-
okay. I was just going to make a motion that we approve the preliminary plat of the views at Rockwood Phase 2 subdivision, subject to the conditions of the engineer's report, the technical review committee memo, and the conditions noted in the staff report. To also include an agreement with the city for Mountain Road right-of-way costs. Does that cover it?
I believe so.
I think so. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do you have any further discussion on that before we call for a vote? Okay, Commissioner Bailey, how do you vote?
Aye.
It's a yes. Commissioner Nancaro?
Yes.
Commissioner Green?
Yes.
I'm a yes. We're not calling on Commissioner Thomas as he wasn't here for the entirety of the discussion, so the motion passes. Okay. Great. That wraps up the administrative items section. I defer the meeting to Commissioner Thomas at this point. I gavel and abdicate all powers, authorities, rights, and privileges that were heretofore granted to me, and I humbly give that back over to Commissioner Thomas.
All right, thanks. I apologize that I'm late tonight. I guess we go into our training. Item number 6, the state required 1-hour planning commission training. Maybe I should go get a drink. I'm just kidding.
I'll provide just
Scott,
a
I
little
assume
bit
that's your,
Yep, I'll provide a little bit of context if you don't mind. Thank you for coming and attending our training. So the state does require 4 hours of training for planning commission members. The attending of meetings on a regular basis counts as 1 hour. Ryan sent out an hour last month for you all to do on your own, and then this counts as an hour. And I believe I need to look back, but I think we can constitute some of the work that we did with our small area plans, the general plan, the active transportation plan, and the centers plan as training as well, because we did talk quite a bit in those about the general plan. So I think we'll be good and meet it, but we do want to follow this. It's something that's given over to the auditors as a state code and a requirement. For tonight's training, what we have is there's something called the Land Use Academy of Utah. And there is a whole video series of trainings, A to Z. There's everything you want on there. This is actually a presentation that was recorded and filmed down at Salt Lake County on middle missing housing from a gentleman who has written a book about form-based code that is, by his own admission, a little outdated now. And then he wrote a book on missing middle housing. And I think this is relevant for a few reasons. One is the state's requiring all local jurisdictions over a certain population, ours included, to do this modern income housing planning. And we're seeing a lot of applications on townhomes and apartments, but not a whole lot of other housing types that are kind of unique or creative. And this has some ideas in it. We're not going to watch all 52 minutes. We're going to start at minute 3. There's a little sales pitch in a few minutes for his book, and then he gets into some information. We're going to end at 30 minutes, about 30, 34, something like that. So if you can stay engaged and awake and listen for 30 minutes. I've watched it twice, because the first time I watched it, then I went down another rabbit hole, and then I actually listened to it again today. There is some real creative information here, and it's what I think the way to think about it is, how would you take this information and start to relay it to what do our current codes and requirements say for our R3 and our R4 zone, or what could future infill development projects look like that would be maybe more creative than just the standard, how many townhomes, like tuck under parking townhomes, can we get? So I think it's good and creative. If you have any questions, we can pause the video along the way and have a discussion. I plan for some discussion on the other end, and then we'll constitute this as our 1 hour training.
I commit to paying as much attention as I do in church.
There's a part where he asks a question of the audience and there's no answer, and he says, "You're all sleeping." And I was like, don't say that. But it's interesting information. I mean, it's a video of someone giving a presentation. So it's not the most dynamic thing ever, but I think the information's really good if you can kind of override that tendency to zone it out.
I'm going to hit the restroom first, so I'm not shown walking out in the middle. I'll be right
That'd be
back.
great. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead and start with that.
Okay, thank you all.
bring back some popcorn, please.
There's
And-
snacks on the back wall.
And we have not figured out how to make sure that to run it off my computer and have the sound come through the room. So we're going to attempt to run 2 videos simultaneously, sound on this computer, video for Zoom on this one, and we'll see if it works out. So best of luck.
Talk about this. So I'm glad to be here today to sort of do a deep dive because as James said, I was here 8 years ago giving an introduction to missing middle housing, sort of just a couple of years after the idea came to us. And, 8 years later, there's good reason to be talking about this, right? Affordability in every corner of the country has gotten very much like it's terrible, right? You're one of the fastest growing markets and highest and fastest growing price points in the entire country, but pretty stunning that, this was 4 years ago, so it's probably higher now. 30% of all households are housing cost burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their annual income on just housing. If you put transportation in that, it usually goes about 50%. And if you actually do that study specific to just renters, it's over 55% of households that are housing cost burdens. And this has touched every corner of the country. Even the small town of 20,000 people I grew up in Nebraska is talking about the need for affordable housing just because of all the different increases in costs that have come along in the last couple of years. Right, this used to be a big metro and a big city problem, but we're now working in cities all across Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, Iowa, South Carolina, North Carolina that I never even heard of 2 years ago. Right, and those pressures of a place like a Boise, Idaho, becoming unaffordable, and people either needing to leave and move somewhere else, or people that are just moving from other places choosing to live in some of these small towns. So it's not just a big city or even a big metro problem. This is really a small town, big city, regional issue. So it's great that we're here talking about this at a county scale. And one of the mayors called the action of, right, this is a partnership. We all need to play a role. We all need to bring our expertise and be part of this solution. Right, and what's happened, and this has been a common theme, right? We all see this. It's nearly impossible to deliver a single family detached house at an attainable price, like any market in the country. So a lot of what, about half of our work is with cities and counties, and the other half of our work is with developers. So we're being brought in to developers that have these large communities that were originally entitled for mostly single family zoning, and we're converting that entitlement because that's what's needed to deliver attainability and the high quality of living that they want to deliver. The other thing that's shifting, and I actually flew here, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, I flew here directly from Dallas. I was actually at a master planning communities conference. The biggest topic of discussion was build to rent and how quickly and how dramatically the rental market has shifted. And a large part of it's because, right, if you can't afford to buy that household that would have historically bought a house, can't afford it. They also don't want to live in that, conventional garden apartment. They want something more sophisticated, a little bit different, a little bit higher quality. And so there's a really big kind of transition happening in the rental market as well that I think this missing middle conversation can plug into. And I'm going to show you an example of a missing middle community that's all for rental that we designed and is being developed in Omaha, Nebraska. And the other great thing is, right, 10 years ago when we created this concept, people could say, oh, it's the planners, it's the architects, it's this big idea, like it's not really reality. But what's happening now is, right, we're at a point where even the ULI has adopted this terminology. They understand the need. They identified it. You should download this report. It's free. It's just called Attainable Housing. ULI published this about 2 or 3 years ago. One of the 3 tools that they recommended to deliver attainability was missing middle housing. So like if ULI saying that, like this is for real. Like we need to be doing this. We need to be figuring this out, both at a policy and sort of public level, but also development and construction level. And then right at the point where an organization like ARP becomes big champions, like 40 million members, like you know that, right, there's momentum in this, and I know that about 50 of you were lucky enough to get a copy of my book. The ARP actually raised money to make sure that that book could be full color. And they're really committed to Missing Middle. They have it on their website, they educate about it, so we're super excited about that partnership. As our population, a higher percentage of our population gets older and it gets over that age of 65, and then Pete mentioned the book, and I was super excited to finally get a chance to, lock myself in a room for a while and actually document my thoughts and put the book down. It's been selling extremely well, and it's been dubbed the Big Yellow Missing Middle book, and it's sort of easy to spot. But hopefully some of you have read it and others will take a look at it. So what's missing in housing? I'm not going to do the one-on-one because I know most of you sort of have been thinking about this and talking about this, but I just want to give a really short chronology. Theory. We actually, so I started my architecture and urban design practice 20 years ago, and our very first project was a master plan. Our client was Santa Barbara County. It's a master plan for Isla Vista, which is a community that's right adjacent to UC Santa Barbara. And I won't tell the full story, but it was the impetus. The Citizen Advisory Committee, sort of the first thing they said to us is we don't want anything more than 17 units per acre. They couldn't tell us why 17 was such the perfect number and why 18 was horrible. And so we backed away from that and said, well, let's go do a walking tour. Let's talk about what you want. And we went to downtown Santa Barbara neighborhoods and saw duplexes, fourplexes, courtyard apartments, and ultimately came to a really great 2-story C-shaped apartment building on a 100-foot by 100-foot lot, and everybody loved it. And it ended up, so let my team do some calculations, and it was 52 units per acre. And so it immediately changed the conversation away from that number that every, many communities get caught up in, or even as planners we do, into form and scale and type, and who are we planning and building for? That was in 2000, we wrote our first code that had these missing middle types in it. So we've been modifying and adapting this for quite some time. It's not new to us. 2011, I wrote the first documented publication. We created the diagram. It seems like the diagram was the point where it started really taking off, because almost anybody can look at the diagram and really understand the concept. And then the missingmiddlehousing.com was launched in 2016 in the book last year. And so I love the way that Sean kind of built up to this, and that scale is really important. And I think that's, if you're going to take one message to your council members, to your neighborhood organizations, is that missing middle housing are house scale buildings. So the buildings should never get bigger than house scale that just happen to have multiple units inside of it. And that's a really, really important part of the message and the way to build support for missing middle housing. And it's not that bigger buildings like bigger apartments or bigger condos aren't important and aren't the right answer in some locations. It's just that we need to be thinking about where we need to find opportunities to apply missing middle, sort of these multi-unit house scale buildings in our communities. And this is just down the street. This is in Daybreak. I use this image in almost every presentation I give because I think this type is one of the great examples. I can show
Pause
this
it,
picture to
pause it
anybody
really
and
fast.
they love it.
Okay, didn't catch it. How many units do you think are in that box? Ooh,
What's that?
so you gotta be like, that's one really pretty house that looks like Kevin
it would
McAllister.
look
The way they have it angled to hide
it-
2 front doors, and there's one on
So
each side.
It looks like one house though, right? Can you agree that
Yes.
if you drove past
Mansion
this,
house.
it would look like one, like a mansion unit? They sometimes they're called like mansion houses that are split up. This is one of those creative options that I'm thinking about, that for North Ogden and the way North Ogden has built and the amount of large single family homes we have on the hillside, how you could integrate some multifamily in.
Mhm.
So I think this is kind of one of several kind of creative options, but
So,
There's 4 in there.
I think it's 3 actually, but we'll see if it's 3 or 4.
But Is something like, I know the sky's the limit, but does that sit on a 1/4 acre lot, a 1/2 acre lot? Third, like,
That
have a yard?
I mean, that could easily sit on a 10,000 square foot, 10,000 square foot lot, 1/4 acre lot with rear garage, like rear loaded garage. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't have a real well-defined open space. Maybe they collectively utilize it.
think it's
But
a
it just
possible
would fit in seamlessly to many neighborhoods in a way that, putting 4 townhomes side by side may not. So that's all. Go ahead, John.
Not just
Okay,
for the
okay, my timing's off, so we'll,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
we're good.
That's
That's fair. Psychologically, that would be difficult. Like, and whose is what and where, and also even deliveries, like, where do I?
Unless somebody actually pointed it out that it wasn't just a big house. And so that's just reinforcing that. So to get to house scale, like we all get caught up in height, right? Height is important. Most of the examples you see of the core missing middle are 2 to 2.5 stories. The upper missing middle, sometimes we create a second category that goes 3 to 4, but it's mostly 2 to 2.5. But the width along the ridge, like how big is that building along the street, really matters. But it also matters how deep the building goes into a lot. Like all of those elements of scale and form really do matter. And we actually regulate every single one of those specifically in our zoning codes or form-based coding. And so why do we call this missing? Some of the Sean slides were hinting at this sort of for your region. But you can see like about a 19, I don't know what it was, nobody's been able to tell me this, and maybe if somebody in the audience finds this out, is about 1979, all of a sudden, like the percentage of the housing that's being delivered, that's missing middle, just started reducing dramatically. And you can see that, less than 10% between 2013 of the housing that was delivered is missing middle. That's 19 units in a building or below. So that's really upper missing middle and missing middle. And the list of barriers, unfortunately, is long. I wrote an entire chapter on this. It was the first time that I actually got a chance to sit down and do some research and hire a graduate student to help me do some research on this. So there's this really long list. But the first thing that every city needs to fix is the barrier of zoning. Because I'll go through this in a little bit of detail, but I would say we've looked at hundreds of codes over the last 5 years, and I would say that about 95% of them fail. They actually don't have any of the right metrics to enable missing middle housing whatsoever. But there's a lot of others, because if we all of a sudden, all the cities that are represented in the county, like suddenly have the best zoning that got adopted tomorrow, the systems are in place to just immediately deliver missing middle, right? There isn't a construction industry that's focused on missing middle, like there's single family in the big buildings. So that needs to evolve. Sort of lending needs to evolve. So there's a lot of systems that will need to evolve and change to enable this to happen. But because we're in such a dire situation right now that we need to figure out a solution. So I'm going to talk first about sort of what cities and counties are doing to remove some of these barriers, and then secondarily what we and other of our colleagues are doing in working with developers to deliver these missing middle housing solutions. So as a very start, so if you look at missingmiddlehousing.com, or if you open, there's an entire chapter in my book that just systematically goes through a full range of the missing middle housing types, from duplex up to courtyard housing. And we give all the metrics that are typical to those housing types to kind of get people to understand. But what we need to start talking about are terminology, right? Shifting away from that density term, the multifamily. We should just be talking about, well, which of these housing types do we want in our cities and counties, right? Do you just want duplexes and cottage courts? Is it okay to have townhouses? And even within townhouses, right? Jeff showed me at Daybreak, there's like, I don't know, there's 20, 30 different variations of townhouses. So which of those forms are okay? Is that 3rd story version okay? Or do you only want the 2-story version? How many in a row? So we really all need to become familiar with the terminology of all of these missing middle housing types, so we can talk about these sort of amongst each other and with our community members and build support for this. So Jake provided this super interesting map, and I'm not gonna say that I had a lot of time to study this, but I'm sure this will be a great discussion point as the conversation moves along, but what this map of Salt Lake County demonstrates is in the purple is that only 11% of residential zoning allows for significant opportunities for missing middle housing. And you can see there's not a lot of that purple, like it's in really concentrated areas. And you can, after the presentation, you can go to Jade and ask him more about this, but this is not uncommon, right? It's pretty typical, and this is part of what we need to address is expanding the opportunities, the geographic area where missing middle can apply. And we really need to start with our comprehensive plans, right? I talked about zoning, yes, zoning, but we need really good, really clear policy direction or comprehensive plans to establish a foundation. So for those of you decision makers in here, when the challenges come, happen, which they probably will for the right kinds of projects, you have that strong policy in place to sort of be your backup, to say, hey, we as a city decided to prioritize missing middle. We decided to prioritize it in these areas. And so, this is what we decided as a city. So we're going to allow these good projects. So just 3 examples in various sizes and types of places that we've worked on that we call it place-based approach to the planning that all have a really strong missing middle enabling component at the core of these comprehensive plans. I just encourage you to look these 3 up. They're really good examples. And then, if you can do one thing, if you're like a planning director or a staff planner, or if you're a council member that wants to influence this, is the best thing a city can do is any 50-foot lot that exists, I'd say in the right location, maybe not everywhere, should allow a fourplex. We don't need to get caught up in FAR, we don't need to get caught up in density, just say, that's a great lot width at this fourplex, right? House scale, 2 units on the bottom and 2 units fits on. It's a quick fix. Give your zoning code a test. Does your zoning code allow a fourplex on a 50-foot wide lot, regardless of what the depth is? So, just a quick overview, like where can you start thinking about geographically where to apply missing middle in your planning efforts? And first and foremost, right, there's small individual lot infill, right? Especially near a train station, near existing infrastructure, near services and amenities. You definitely need to be enabling missing middle, even at, it doesn't need to be a daybreak scale, right? We need to be thinking about enabling this at daybreak scale and at that 50-foot wide lot scale, right? So, and that's really brain surgery, right? It's a really nuanced approach that we need to be thinking about. Secondary corridors, yesterday I was in Draper for the very first time. I was in a car driving down Front Street. Actually saw some great historic missing middle examples. I saw some beautiful old brownstone mansions. Like that's the kind of secondary corridor that I feel could be a great application and place to apply missing middle housing. Transitions from higher intensity corridors, right? Every city has a strategy. We're going to allow the bigger buildings in this location on this corridor. Well, hey, guess what? Similar to what Daybreak's doing in terms of transition and scale, it's a great idea to create areas and adopt zoning for missing middle as a transition from those larger apartment buildings into single family home neighborhoods. And then thoughtful transit-oriented development. This is actually the North Berkeley BART station. If you're familiar at all, it's actually in my neighborhood. And we were hired by the city to do a study of could we meet the state's minimum density requirements and still integrate missing middle scale buildings at the edges that front onto single family neighborhoods. So you can see here 4 to 5 stories in the middle, transitioning into multiplexes at the edge, and we were actually able to achieve, I think it was 82 units per acre over the whole site with a thoughtful approach of transition and variety of heights. And then there's like grayfield sites at 30, 40, 50, 60 acre dying mall, dead mall, dying strip mall, great opportunity, especially in these more suburban communities, to think about maybe some bigger buildings along the corridors and they transition down the missing middle at the edges. And then our existing single family neighborhoods could be question mark, and this is the big political touch point. I'm not saying that every single family neighborhood and every single family zone lot should be sort of changed to allow missing middle. But I think cities should very thoughtfully and in a very detailed way sort of assess where in the city they want to prioritize missing middle. And in some instances, especially near the light rail, for example, it may make sense to transition some of those single family lots into this missing middle housing scale. And this is another great historic example from the Avenues neighborhood in Salt Lake. So some of the planning and zoning barriers. Okay, this is a quiz, just what do you think the density of this building is? Do y'all know? Anybody? 32? I heard over here, I didn't know what the number was. 40? Anybody else? Price is right, I'm doing the price is right here. Anybody else want to guess? $1. $2. So on one of my missing walking tours, I often do this for APA or CNU or DOI or any of these organizations. This is Midtown Sacramento, right? One of those types you can't help but really like. It's 2 stories. This is also on about 100 foot by 100 foot lot. And inevitably, like a young woman came out the front door and she was, and she we often talk to them. She really loves living in this apartment, been here for a long time, doesn't plan on moving. We do some math, we count the meters, we count the doorbells. And this apartment generates a density of 90 units per acre. And I can guarantee there's not a single comprehensive plan or zoning code in the entire country that allows 90 units per acre that caps the height at 2 or 3 stories. Right, here's the disconnect. This is why we're not getting smaller, more thoughtful missing middle building types. The reason it generates that kind of density is because the units are 500 square feet. And so the problem with density-based zoning is it treats every unit, regardless of size, exactly the same. If it's a 3,500 square foot unit, that's a unit. If it's a 500 square foot unit, that counts as a unit in your density. So that's why we just encourage get rid of density. Take it out of your zoning, take it out of your comp plan. Let's get more creative about this. We often find that, okay, so we were hired by the city of Austin, Texas, really big city geographically, to assess their zoning. They didn't have a single zoning district in the entire city of Austin, Texas that enabled missing middle housing. It jumped immediately from, well, they allowed a duplex in their single family zone, but it jumped immediately to allowing 50-foot tall, unlimited size buildings in the next zoning district up. So that's pretty common as well, that the missing middle zoning districts are actually missing completely. So this was my message earlier, just be really direct about what this is a typical example of, the zoning district can be called whatever you want. It can be called missing middle, it can be called mixed housing. But this particular one, we just say, these are the range of missing middle types that are allowed in this zoning district. Like, it doesn't need to be any more difficult than that. And these are the minimum lot sizes for each of those types. And that's what I encourage. Don't let the developer guess what you're trying, what you want. Just tell them what you want, what should be allowed. And this is a sheet I have of like the town center zone or the housing overlay zone. It's often too broad. It's well intended, but it's too unpredictable for developers really to come in and deliver missing middle is what we found, especially for the smaller builders who are most likely to deliver this. Then the metrics are wrong, right? Maximum densities are usually too low, minimum lot sizes are too large, setbacks are too large. We have this system we'll talk a little bit more about where we actually assess zoning codes and do these graphs to compare, show where the zoning districts, which of the missing middle type zoning districts allow and which they don't allow. So this is interesting. The metrics are often very misleading too, and I think that's where a repetitive message here is if you take the same fourplex, okay, we start with a 75 by 50 foot lot. And then you take that exact same building, same number of units, and the lot just incrementally gets bigger, and you analyze the metrics. the density doubles and the FAR doubles, sorry, as the lot gets smaller, the FAR doubles and the lot, or the density doubles, but the building stays the exact same size. So it just shows the lack of predictability that you can actually get with a density and FAR-based system. It's not controlling the form at all. So it's just a really, we need to be thinking about this a little bit more creatively and a little bit differently. I'm just gonna admit, I don't like this type. It's the type under townhouse with the big garage door on the front. And I just say, you may have to allow this, and it's okay to allow this in specific parts of your town, but it's bad for walkability. And it's, it usually doesn't deliver attainability because they're usually fairly big units. And so just be really thoughtful, because if you allow this, this is what most builders will do. I'll just say that. So I see this all over the country. And then my least favorite type is the slot home. And it's two rows of townhouses turned perpendicular to the street. And I'll just say your region has a bad case of slot homes. And you need to figure out a way. I know I'm pretty sure the city's changing their zoning. Just as you're thinking about enabling missing middle, decide if you want this. And if you don't want it, the reason there's pushback is because it takes a 3-story volume that basically goes from the front of the lot to the rear of the lot. So there's usually issues with neighbors on all 3 sides. And it usually doesn't deliver attainability because they're bigger units. And we've done economic analysis in a number of cities, and they're feasible, right? Developers can build them feasibly. They're feasible in a pro forma, but they usually don't deliver attainability. So you have to be thoughtful. And I think they actually can erode the quality and character of a walkable neighborhood pretty quickly. And let's talk about mapping. There's an exercise, I don't know, maybe Jake's done this or one of the other Salt Lake County staff, but every town should do this. What percentage of your town or city or county allows for only single family zoning? This was a big mistake every city made that sort of led us to the problem we're in. The typical US city has about 80 to 85% of residential land that only allows single family. Right, so we need to chip away at it. This doesn't need to be 0%, but right, we need to find more opportunities to deliver missing middle. We're currently working in San Jose, California. And they're one of the biggest offenders here. It's 94% of their residential land is zoned only for single family. And you can imagine a city that's right next to Silicon Valley and is going to have Google's new campus. You know how much a little bungalow costs in San Jose, California? Like a couple $1 million for a 19,000 square foot bungalow. So I will say that I'm glad you're talking about this now, because I feel like regions like Salt Lake City, if they don't do something about this, will be the Bay Area in 10 years. That's my prediction. If something is not done, it will be that bad. So the other, it's kind of a tip. So if your zoning code allows 5 units of any size, you won't get 5 small units like this. You need to incentivize the small units. So what we like to do in our codes is say any unit under, let's say 750 square feet counts as half unit. And that's the kind of state legislation that enabled most of the great pocket neighborhoods that have been built in the Seattle region that you see like the pocket or the cottage company. And so like this is sort of creative thinking, incentivize small, treat it as half a unit, both in terms of if you're calculating density impact fees, incentivize that. So the other thing is, why not? So the yellow box in all 4 of these examples is the exact same height, width, and depth as the container. So why not write a zoning code that says it's the box that we're worried about, the size? But you can either do 1 unit, 2 units, 4 units, or 8 units within that same box. Because this 8-plex is going to deliver way more attainability than any of these other examples. So just a seed to plant. It seems like a lifetime ago that I wrote a book on form-based coding. It's another good resource. it's a little less readable than the Missing Middle book, but I just encourage you to look at that, or the Form-Based Code Institute has a very great website with free information. I just encourage you to take a look at. Unfortunately, a lot of the form-based coding efforts in the last 10 years have actually been very effective. I'm gonna bet that we actually see a lot, that we get calls from the city, oh, we adopted a form-based code 7 years ago. I'm not getting any help, what's wrong? And so we're kind of going into a diagnosis. So just, we need to be really thoughtful about this and just think about new tools. Form-based coding is not the only way, the only tool, but let's be thoughtful about it. How many of you have heated conversations about parking in your communities? All right, there's more than that. You're all now. So, right, more parking equals larger lots plus fewer units plus equals higher prices, right? It's pretty straightforward. Like we need to tackle the parking conversation as we tackle the missing middle conversation. And we've done extensive studies, and we often plug these into pro formas, working with an economist or working with scenario modeling of the yellow building has 1-bedroom units in a 4-plex. The blue building has 2-bedroom units in a 4-plex, and it just shows the lot sizes that are required. Minimum lot size with no parking, 1 space LA loaded, 1 space front loaded, and we've done this for 2 spaces per unit. You know, at 2 spaces per unit, most of these types are absolutely not feasible economically or even just spatially. And right, you can run the numbers. I just encourage you to have an economist run the numbers of what's the impact on cost for that additional parking, because it's really important. My message is one of my messages is you can't be for attainable housing and also be for high parking requirements. Like you can't have both. You need to pick. Which is more important to you? You want great spaces for cars, or you want spaces for people to live in? Like, I think that's a really important part of the conversation. And then more and more of what we've been doing has included an economist, right? Because we can't just say, well, we think the 4-plex is going to, deliver attainability, or a single family home might not. But what we find in working with the economists is, hey, units need to be 6-plex, or those units need to be 600 square feet, not 800, or 1,000, not 1,400. And so I just encourage you, as you go through your planning exercises, like make sure you run the numbers. Partner with your development community, run those numbers. Identifying barriers. So I'm gonna go through.
Are we good?
34. Yep.
Yeah, we're probably good. Okay. Okay, well, thank you for hanging out through that. I think the information is really interesting, and for North Ogden, what I've seen over the last 4 years is that we are a city that is responsive to a variety of housing types. That's certainly true. We have a number of existing projects that have been entitled. We've got quite a bit of new multifamily that has come in, and we've considered that Planning Commission has approved, City Council has approved. Our future land use map shows it. And we're not afraid of that, scary word density in the right places. We're already planning for it. But what we seem to be getting is a lot of the same type of product. And whether that's because that's what's feasible and sellable in Utah, or it's what's easy to build and, quick to throw together, and we get that result. But in watching this, there were a few key takeaways that I had. And one was that we could think about the box on the ground, not the number of units. That's a really important one, especially for areas of our city that have historically been mixed with 2 and 3 plexes in addition to single family homes, which is essentially the entire residential city center of our area, of our community, and leading up even into the residential R18 and R18 AG. If you step back or drive around this older area town, you'll see that it's a collection of apartments, single family homes, duplexes, upstairs, downstairs duplexes, a variety of different housing types. And what are we really concerned about? Is it that we want a certain shape and size of box to hit the ground, but we don't really care if it's 2 front doors and that would be a duplex? Or is that the thing that we're really, heavily concerned about? So I've got a question. But I was just going to say this, what this did for me is it just said there are different ways in order to provide housing types and attainable housing than just waiting for the market to turn around and produce us with 3-story garden apartments, which is kind of what we've resulted in receiving. Good. Commissioner?
I don't think we necessarily need to debate every item he talked about tonight. That's not the point. I get that, but when he brought that point up about, hey, it's the shape of the box, I thought, well, it's not just the shape. It's people care about historically the concerns that have come to the planning commission have been, hey, a single family owner occupied home is at least in public perception more likely to be upkept and stuff than a building that's owned by 4 people or rented by 4 people or something. So owned by a slumlord out of state, something like that. So I rest my case.
I think when you discuss these things, I think there's another missing middle in the sense of you got to start with the car, you got to start with walkability, you got to have places for people to go to. So for me, height limits, those might work. The shape of the box. I mean, what about the shape of the land? Like there's so many things, but a lot of this topic, in my opinion, it falls apart because it's surrounded by some serious assumptions that people don't need their car or that walkability to where. If you take North Ogden or a lot of Utah communities in general, starting with the shape of the box or the what's allowed in different zones is I think further down the line, it's how do you, if you want walkability and you want less parking, how do you get places for people to walk to so they don't need the parking, or if they do park their car, it's kind of a pain in the butt to get it back out, sort of thing. So anyway, that's just
All
kind
up
of
and
my
down the
thoughts.
street.
Like
Down the resident.
like, I don't know, like, do you start like in a single family neighborhood and, there's lots of detention ponds or whatever. Do you first allow small residential commercial, right? Probably not for North Ogden, but, a coffee shop, a cafe, or I think you go there first and then it would cause the reason for the density. I think the whole topic around the missing middle, the guy's the missing middle isn't his idea. It's been a theory for so long. The theory of that was based on the distance from the city center. So immediately the original theory kind of discussed, city center is very walkable. You get out into a borough and you're now mass transit, and maybe the higher end, higher class people have a car, and then you get out into the burbs and it's totally car dependent, but they addressed it a lot better. Now, this gentleman's trying to apply it in real life, but I feel like being an architect or being on a planning commission, we would all love some of these ideas, but we got a bunch of townhomes down by Kurtz, and where are they going to walk to? The car wash. Well, they got to drive their car to the car wash. So I think you have to start on the mercantile or commercial or public access side of things before you get to this. But
Or the other side is that we just accept in many ways that North Ogden is auto oriented. I mean, I think that that's not going to change. We've got 6,000 residential water connections or so today. We have about, if everything were to be built, something like 1,500 coming multifamily units that are coming. That could potentially provide some change to areas like Kurtz and make it a little bit more walkable in a community center. But for most people who live up the hill, they're going to use their car. So understanding that parking is a known requirement in North Ogden, and the state has determined that a standalone single-family box at $450,000 is the attainable number that we're shooting for. How big does that box on the ground have to be? Or what if it doesn't come with a garage? What if it's just a carport? What if it's just a group parking lot that's parked off street so that you can still snowplow? I mean, there's other areas that we could be thinking about this. And I think starting from the economics of it are really important too, because you can provide attainability if you bought the land 10 years ago and your holding costs have been minimal. But today, if you have to buy the land today and then turn around and build it in today's market with today's prices and costs and the lack of,
Today's
stubs,
bureaucratic requirements as well,
then
very
it
expensive.
makes it really difficult. And there's some areas that I think it's impractical in a lot of ways. And I don't know if I'm going to say this on record as my opinion, my personal opinion, that I think it's impractical in some ways to say a community like North Ogden will provide standalone single family at $450,000 out the door. I just think that's going to be a really tall order for us to hit when places like Northwest Weber County that are relatively flat, don't have the same development challenges as we do. The land cost is significantly lower, and their barriers are things like how do we connect the sewer through areas that are missing areas. And then they're thinking about public improvement districts and ways to provide the services, but the land cost isn't the barrier. The ability to put the number of units or number of doors on the ground at standalone single family isn't the barrier the way some of our infill parcels are. So for the planning commission, I think it's, what do you want to see? We've got lots of coming tuck under townhomes. We've got quite a few garden apartments coming. Should we be considering a more form-based code for things like cottage court type of development? Or are duplexes something that we should reconsider after, we tried it 2 years ago, but reconsider putting into areas of the code, areas of the city in the proper zoning areas in order to see some proper some actual duplexes that would be sellable individual units, not just one box, one house, it's rentable 2 ways, but you could actually own the interest in a half wall shared unit. I think that there's things for us to consider here, and what does missing middle mean for North Ogden? Because even our townhomes and our garden apartments are going to rent at higher rents than Harrisville and Ogden City do, just by the nature that they're brand new and we're a higher desire.
Well, and
community.
I could be mistaken about this, but I do feel like we do have a lot of just very homogeneous building happening in North Ogden. Like we've got our single family homes, and then all of the apartment and more high density projects look super similar to me. So one part of this training video I did enjoy is this concept of, instead of thinking of it as single family residence versus high density, these different terms, the cottage court, there's literally, I think 9 of them that were listed. I think that's really interesting. And personally, when you look at areas like Daybreak, it's beautiful. I mean, from an architectural, like they've got all these different things happening. And I worry, I've mentioned this at a prior meeting, but that area down by, the Kurtz, et cetera, we have all that high density apartment going in, and you just said that there's a whole slate of the, what is it called with the garage below and the
Like a tuck under townhome.
So, I mean, I do think it could be really awesome for this idea of our general plan. We mentioned beauty a lot. We mentioned that this is a beautiful city, and I think that that's a key piece, but it'd be kind of nice to see some of this, like the cottage court, for example. I think personally is visually much more appealing, but also just a variety, get into more of a heterogeneous kind of display here of what high density could look like. So I'm not sure if other folks feel the same and if there's something we could do, but I would be interested in working towards something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking, right? In my field, I just don't think there's enough experimentation in doing new things. So something like this with a unique culture to a unique town, I mean, it would be pretty radical to see if they're, to take some city-owned land or something, or partner with a private developer and do a case study. Do a case study where you experiment with these ideas, based on your town, and let it be something that cuts through all of the vernacular when someone comes in and goes, "What are you looking for?" Well,
I
got one.
I think it's really interesting, point is well taken, but when I first started on the planning commission, which has been probably 7 or 8 years ago now, we had this big experiment that everyone was so excited about, which was exactly what we're talking about, called Patriot Barn. Patriot. And it had a mix of all these different apartments, townhouses, cottages, older folk apartment building kind of thing. And it was this great experience, and it was going to have a commercial all in front because all of these thousands of people could walk there, and here we are, however many years later, and I mean, it just has not, the demand or the developers or whoever, it hasn't materialized, and it's not.
That's what I was
it's
saying,
not
like,
due
go out and
because
do
of
it.
Our experiment
Also-
or
also
our,
just-
we laid the groundwork to have this beautiful thing happen, but the reality is the developer isn't there, I don't know, maybe the demand isn't there, the commercial hasn't showed up,
Also,
I
not
don't
a lot of
know.
people walk to a car wash.
Yeah.
That was
That's
one problem with that.
And maybe that's it, is like, if all the commercial was there, then
Well,
the
I
rest would
think the
come
reason the
aside.
car wash is there is we got desperate because what the desirable businesses
Right.
weren't falling in. And it was like, well, somebody will finally,
So it is interesting to say, well, let's do this experiment or case study or something, but I kind of feel like
No, I mean,
We are
I'm
doing that, but
saying,
it
I'm
just-
saying literally go build one.
yeah.
So council, at their work session specifically talked about this, and I'm going to bring up the map. We have this property on the corner of Alberta and 400 East, this little area right here. And they specifically said, let's look at putting some attainable housing on this piece. I also took that to mean that the city owns all these houses on the western side of 450.
Right
And
there at the pension.
that these all, as the road widens, those will all need to be, or majority of them will have to come down because the road or the sidewalk will go through the house. And so there's an opportunity there to look at something creative that blends in with the neighborhood, but might provide some attainable housing, understanding that because it's a city project, then there's more backlash because it looks like we're trying to get money or whatever. But there's some opportunities for things like this that the council is at least open to. Like I said, they specifically said this corner, let's look at it. And I think it would make sense here as well. The hard part is that these are really established neighborhoods, and if they turn into 3-story buildings, the neighbors are not going to enjoy that. However, there may be an opportunity to, since the city owns it, to say, look, this is the approved plan. Like if you're buying this lot, this is the building you're building, that's sensitive and takes a lot of it into it because the city doesn't have the incentive to make the money as opposed to try the thing. The flip side being cities don't always fare well when we get involved in development. And so there's this like balance of all these factors that are coming
Yeah.
into play.
I mean, it could be like put out a request for proposals, I mean, Salt Lake has their RDA, and a lot of interesting things have come that it's the city's still involved, but they're basically picking and choosing their favorite design that they think, fits the needs, But anyway, a lot of this is just so unique to each individual city, like the examples of a missing middle, go by North Ogden, there's a couple little duplexes and apartments down on North Ogden Elementary. That's a good area too, but I think a lot of this on paper and going around to different cities and saying this is a great example, good. But sometimes you might have to just experiment and do one or push someone hard enough to do what you need.
And this is a row of duplexes that are just north on 2800 north of where you just mentioned. These look better than they did 6 years ago. They've recently been refaced, re-roofed. But a good point of there's some things integrated in existing neighborhoods that people haven't found super offensive. Again, now that these are fixed up, they were offensive to a lot of people for a while, which I think is why the landlords fixed them up.
That 55 and older community that they built, I think it was on the Sod Farm. I think those are like quads, aren't they?
Yeah, Cherry Springs Villas. Mhm.
I mean, I think those are beautiful and probably successful. That would be a good example of
Where are those the ones by Walker Cinema or are they over by North Shore?
No,
They're
by
actually
the
by
golf
the
course.
golf
Oh,
course
okay.
on,
okay.
off of just north of 2600.
Okay.
150 East and then
Yeah.
Pleasant View Drive down to 2700.
And they actually are gorgeous, but it's, it's designed to be
Yeah.
55 and older
Yeah.
community. But, yeah, I think it's a good test case, that maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have some things to say, well, what is
Right.
this, how successful is it?
Well,
How-
something like that in more areas.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
Right.
problem we have is
right.
we limit the areas and then it's like, oh, we get these little one-offs and
Mhm.
now the next area try something different.
Mhm.
Okay,
Well,
well,
as-
thanks for that.
Yeah, as the planning
Yeah.
commission, the way I would think about this is, are there areas of the city where you think a more creative approach to housing infill would be important? Because we'd be interested as staff in what your thoughts are. And you live here, I live in Kaysville. I do drive around the city a lot, but I'd be interested to know from the planning commission standpoint, these are areas where you might consider some of these changes. And then the other is, we've been pretty free market approach. Like we have our different zoning codes, but then we don't tell anybody what the box on the ground is going to end up looking like outside of some basic setbacks and height requirements. So how much further do we want to go to dictate the design in something? Or do we leave it open as, here's a menu of options, and when you go to do a rezone through the legislative process, the planning commission kind of gets to pick one as a recommendation, then the city council comes in and gets to pick one, but it would become a negotiation between the developer and the city at the time of rezone for what actually gets constructed. And we might have that menu, so we have some assurance. You're going to be one of 6 types of housing that are in this particular area that we've decided actually fits. I'm not a developer, and so I worry about trying to be too heavy-handed with a developer, because I think a lot of times they're smart and they understand what they need to do. They are going to make money, but they're trying to provide a product, a housing, something that will sell on the other side. And if we get too specific, we could, bind ourselves and then nobody ever comes and we just wait and wait and wait.
I lived in East Germany. It was the most monotonous place from a architectural standpoint you've ever seen. And I'd hate to, I'm not saying we're going to be East Germany, but I like some variety myself.
But the idea of a menu of options for a high density zone is not terrible because it's those projects that tend to be all about what is the cheapest, but not necessarily what's best for the community or the residents.
Right.
So, I mean, I would definitely think that would not be a bad idea. So Scott, are you, just to wrap up, how do we get to a place where we maybe consider some of these things? What would you recommend for us as next steps?
Yeah, I think this is a point that Commissioner Green and I were talking about before this meeting, is that items for staff, we can do staff-led initiatives, and we don't always do that because we want it to be supported by the Planning Commission and City Council. But at any point, a member of the Planning Commission can reach out to me, Ryan, Joyce, or John and ask for something to be put on the agenda. So if you have a consideration for an item, and that could be zoning text amendment, general plan items, any of the future land use map stuff, that can be a directive to staff to bring something forward. And we may work with you on what that, the discussion around that item might be. So for next steps, I would ask you to consider areas of the city where we may want to look at, I'll just say increased density, but in reality, it's like housing choice, providing housing choice. Should we reconsider bringing back the 2-family dwellings back into some of our zones that historically had them, like the R18 and the RCC zone? Planning Commission had recommended yes on the heels of the future land use map in 2022, and the council had concerns that we weren't able to get over, and so they ultimately did not pass putting 2-family dwellings back into that area. And then I think maybe this menu of options, if you've driven around, if you've seen something, you've seen an example of a project that you think is creative, maybe just jotting that address down and sending it to us, or bringing that back up in a planning commission meeting in the future of, here's a product that, why don't you go out and take a look at, would be really helpful for us, because that way we're, collectively all of these people driving around the region and seeing existing projects and products that we think that's something that might work in North Ogden. That would all be really helpful feedback for staff.
Thank you.
Thanks. Item number 7 are public comments. Do we have anybody online?
We do still have Chris Pulver online.
We'll open up for public comments.
He raised his hand.
Go
So
ahead.
I just have one comment. And it was on the escrow for the road. And I think the solution, and if he's not listening, that's fine, that Commissioner Mason individually.
I'm listening, baby. You
will-
keep
will
talking.
Will raise his taxes individually if it costs more than what developer will provide.
Say that
Can
again.
you say that again?
No, I'm kidding. So I'll just leave that as a joke as opposed to a actual comment. So
Oh,
it's the
it
way
fell a
that
little
you
flat, but it wasn't the worst joke I've heard.
today. Yeah, that was it. Sorry.
Thank
And
you.
I think the biggest thing, besides the talking about the housing, is like you're talking about the commercial, because really it's a food desert between Smith's and Walmart, and you know you can't make a walkable community if there's no even a 7-Eleven. Sorry, sort of subject, but you know, at a corner, you know, someplace in between those two, and that's just something that, like you said, it's either market driven or just flat out you don't get the people. But at the same time, we're developing huge swaths of land, and it's just not coming to bear. You know, so some of the things that you know, and that's the problem with planning commission, is that you can only plan so much and then wait for the developers to show up. So I understand the problem, but at the same time, it's frustrating when you just get more, you know, a crap ton more houses or housing and not anything that's going to help folks to not go to Walmart or all the way up to Smith's. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Pulver, thank you for attending this whole meeting. That's impressive.
Well, I'm eating at the same time, so.
Remarks from planning commissioners, anything?
A question from my daughter. She texted me during the meeting and I thought I'd ask here. What's the fun Christmas lights at the Barker Park? I quoted that verbatim. Does anyone know what's the fun?
So on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday is the North Pole. We've got Santa, the live reindeer, free hot cocoa, the live nativity, a menorah, just
Sounds right up her alley. And yes, she's 21 years old. Okay, thanks.
My question is just, I think we received an email from Joyce about 2 planning commissioners being replaced. Can we know who's exiting?
Well, the two who are up are Brandon Mason and Eric Thomas. Their terms end January 31st, 2025. We have received 5 applications, 1 from somebody who lives in Ogden City. So that person will be disqualified. So we have 4 current applicants.
They're moving.
Maybe they're moving to North Ogden, or we're annexing
got
part.
4 weeks.
Let's just say
That's a-
right now in a public meeting, we're annexing part of Ogden City.
Is it?
But I would, if I could be so bold to ask for you to ask your friends and neighbors and other residents of North Ogden who you think would show interest and be a good planning commission member, we would love to have more applicants at this point. So applications will be open
deadline?
until
So I am not re-upping.
Okay, that's a little.
And
that's a
I
big change for us.
huge,
Yeah.
yeah.
14 years, I've decided. I've outlived everybody else in the city, so I just, well,
I was gonna save my sentimentality on that for the January meeting. It's not his last meeting.
Right.
I'll be
Okay.
here
I
for-
was just curious because when I heard 2, I was like, wait, what did you say the application deadline is? Sorry, Scott, it was
Yeah.
January.
I need to look it up.
so applications are this Friday
Oh,
because the mayor does interviews and I mean, several of you have been through the process.
yeah.
And so we need to have someone who can be trained an hour with Scott and then here for we like to have them the last meeting of January, just so they can at least see it to then in theory start the first meeting of February.
So I did put in an application and the heavy call for more applicants is pretty telling. That
that's-
so
That's
womp
not the
womp
case.
womp.
No.
No, it's I get it. It's I'm not even offended.
case. We,
I'm
we,
not.
we just do want, I mean, we want to make sure that we get a good applicant pool, and I think that we have a good applicant pool, but it's,
Right.
you know, we
so
have two,
yeah.
we've got 4 applicants for 2 seats, and so let's just make sure that we get that information out there.
Okay.
Womp womp womp.
Any other remarks, commissioners? Scott, anything else?
We will not have a meeting 1st of January,
I was gonna tease him and say, oh yeah, we'll see you on the 1st of January.
on the 1st of January.
However, the week after is that work session with the council.
Yes, so please plan on the work session with the council that you've been notified about, and then
That's on a Wednesday.
on a Tuesday.
Oh, I can do it Tuesday.
Tuesday we'll meet with the city council
Okay.
on Tuesday, January
7th, I think.
8th.
Yes, 7th, yeah.
And then please plan on the 15th. So as of right now, we have several subdivisions that have gone through the technical review committee meeting process and have been provided comments back. A lot of them have promised they'll get us engineered update documents for that planning commission meeting on the 15th, but it needs to come in essentially like middle of next week. So we'll see if that happens or not. But plan on a meeting on January 15th, please.
And council did approve the West States Development Agreement. You know, a lot of that was based on the feedback from the council on some tweaks or the commission on tweaks and changes, but they have approved that for 315 units. There's a city park included in there. And then it's owner occupied townhomes on the northwest, apartments where you saw them, and then townhomes that would be for rent, or, I mean, they could turn it into a for sale product, but most likely it'll be a for rent on the east side between 300 East and Washington Boulevard.
Right. That's all I've got.
Okay. John, anything else?
No, I think those covered the items that I had.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.